The incidents you're about to hear all took place inside real hospitals in the United States. They were reported by staff or patients, and despite investigations, no official explanation exists. The emergency ward was quiet that night, too quiet. Most of the staff had left for their shifts or had gone home, leaving only a skeleton crew, a tired nurse, a young intern, and a lone security guard who spent more time scrolling through his phone than patrolling the dim hallways. It was 2 a.m. when the first strange thing happened. A patient arrived, an older man in his 70s, unresponsive, his body pale, lips bluish. No relatives accompanied him, and the paramedics claimed he was brought in from a street accident. They left quickly, whispering among themselves about how the man had murmured incoherent phrases in a voice that sounded almost inhuman. The intern, fresh from medical school and eager to prove herself, was assigned to observe the patient. She noted something odd immediately. The monitors showed an erratic heartbeat, jumping wildly, then flatlining for seconds before spiking again. The man's eyes were closed, yet the intern could swear he was watching her. Hours passed. Nothing seemed normal. Every time the nurse left to fetch medication, the intern heard faint whispers, soft, guttural, and almost imperceptible. The voice seemed to come from the walls themselves. At first, she thought it was exhaustion, hallucination creeping in after 12-hour shifts, but the whispers became clearer, forming broken sentences. "Get out. They are watching. Don't let them take me." By 4 a.m., the patient had begun moving his fingers, small at first, almost twitching, then deliberately, as if testing the strength in his hands. His eyes remained closed, but the whispers intensified. The intern bent closer, pressing the stethoscope against his chest. His heartbeat was irregular, yet between the beats she could hear faint breathing, but it didn't match the patient's rhythm. Then the lights flickered. One moment the room was normal. The next, shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, black shapes crawling like liquid, moving independently of any light source. The intern froze, heart hammering. The security guard passing by noticed nothing. He was still absorbed in his phone. Suddenly, the patient's eyes snapped open. They were no longer human, completely black, like polished obsidian reflecting the fluorescent lights. The intern stumbled backward. The whispers grew louder, now a chorus of distorted voices echoing through the ward. "Leave, before it's too late. We are coming." Panicking, she ran to the nurse who had just returned, but the nurse wasn't there. Instead, a cold draft swept the room, and the intern realized with horror that the hallway beyond the patient's room was empty, and it had always been empty. The patient began sitting up on his own. No machines, no medical interventions. He moved like something alive in the shadows. He turned his head toward the intern, and for a moment the black eyes blinked. Or did they? Something unnatural pulsed behind them, something she couldn't name. She wanted to scream, but found herself rooted to the floor. The whispers escalated into incoherent screams, echoing from every corner of the ward. The monitors went haywire. The heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, all fluctuated like the patient was not a patient, but a storm contained in flesh. Then the lights went out entirely. Total darkness swallowed the ward. Only the monitors glowed, their lights flickering like stuttering fireflies. In the pitch black, the whispers became words. "He doesn't belong here. Leave or join us." The intern stumbled to the door, but it wouldn't open. She pounded against it, screaming. Then she felt it. A hand, pale, icy, impossibly long fingers curling around her wrist. She turned to see the patient standing, taller now, distorted, as if the hospital ceiling had stretched his body. His black eyes bored into her soul. Everything seemed to slow. The monitors emitted a high-pitched screech that rattled her teeth. And then she saw them, shadows forming shapes behind the patient, other figures, faceless, thin, floating just above the floor. They reached toward her, their whispers now deafening, like 1,000 lungs exhaling in unison. The intern's vision blurred. She collapsed to the ground, feeling herself being dragged into darkness. Just as her consciousness was about to fade, the lights flickered back on. She was alone. The patient's bed was empty. The monitors were normal. No trace of the shadows, no whispers, only the soft hum of hospital machinery. Shaken, she ran to the guard. There was someone, an old man, something, She trailed off, trying to catch her breath. But the guard shook his head. "What are you talking about? No patients arrived tonight except the trauma cases. The old man doesn't exist. There's no record of him." The intern's blood ran cold. She rushed to the computer, pulling up patient records. No entries, no files, nothing. Every official document from that night was blank where the mysterious patient should have been. And yet, when she glanced at the monitors, she swore she saw the black eyes staring back at her, just for a moment. Later, reports from the day shift mentioned a strange phenomenon. One trauma room had monitors that had run wild for exactly 23 minutes, yet no patient was ever found there. The young intern quit immediately, citing exhaustion. No one else mentioned the whispers. But some nights, long after she had left, she would receive calls from unknown numbers, silent calls, and when she answered, a low, raspy voice would whisper, "We are still here, watching, waiting."
It was one of those nights where the hospital felt alive in a way that wasn't quite natural. The corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and something else, something metallic, like blood long dried, almost imperceptible but present enough to make your skin crawl. Dr. Kazim, a forensic pathologist, had stayed late to finish paperwork in the morgue. He was meticulous, obsessed with details. His assistant, a quiet, soft-spoken medical student named Aisha, had been helping him organize the recent arrivals. Most were expected, victims of accidents, natural deaths, and a few from violent crimes. But one body had no paperwork. The body was placed on the farthest cold slab, the one that rarely saw use. There was no ID, no record, nothing, just the sheet covering a male corpse. What struck Dr. Kazim was the slight rise and fall of the chest under the sheet. He frowned. Did someone leave a live patient in here?" he asked, half joking, half serious. Aisha shook her head. The morgue security cameras wouldn't let anyone in, and even if they did, the doors lock automatically. They lifted the sheet. The corpse's eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. The body was cold, pale, rigid in a way that made the muscles look stretched. But the eyes seemed wrong. They were not just lifeless, they were watching, following their movements as if trying to anticipate them. Shivers ran down Aisha's spine. Dr. Kazim leaned closer, adjusting his magnifying lens. "This is impossible. Rigor mortis is complete. The eyes somehow intact. No pulse, no respiration." They began the routine exam, documenting injuries and checking for cause of death. But every few minutes, the eyes seemed to twitch, just the slightest movement, almost imperceptible, like the corpse was reacting to their presence. Hours passed. The lights in the morgue flickered. Usually this was just faulty wiring, but tonight it felt purposeful, like the building itself was breathing. Shadows crept along the walls, long and unnatural.
Aisha thought she heard whispers, low murmurs echoing off the steel slabs. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Dr. Kazim frowned. "It's just the ventilation." But it wasn't the ventilation. The whispers became clearer, fragmented words, almost pleading. "Help! Don't leave me! They are coming!" Aisha froze. "I think it's coming from the slab, the corpse." Dr. Kazim laughed nervously, dismissing her fears. Yet when he leaned closer to examine the body's chest cavity, the air grew inexplicably cold. Frost formed on the steel table, curling around the corpse's body like smoke. Suddenly, the sheet lifted slightly, without anyone touching it. Aisha stumbled back. Dr. Kazim's heart raced. It's just the air vent." But then the corpse's mouth opened. Not a gaping jaw, but a subtle, deliberate motion. A sound came, a soft, guttural whisper, just audible above the hum of the fridge-like morgue. "Leave or join us." The two stared, paralyzed. Time seemed to stretch. The whispers multiplied, echoing through the room in overlapping layers. Figures began forming in the corners, shadows coalescing into faint humanoid shapes, standing motionless but radiating menace. Aisha wanted to run, but her legs refused. Dr. Kazim, trained in the scientific, rational world, tried to approach the slab. The moment his hand reached out, the body lurched upward, pulling itself halfway from the steel table. The skin stretched in ways that seemed impossible, sinews snapping and reforming, as if the corpse were a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. The whispers grew louder, now forming a chorus of anguished voices. "He's ours! Join! Join! Join!" Dr. Kazim grabbed Aisha's arm. "Run! Now!" They bolted for the door, but the morgue wasn't the morgue anymore. The walls seemed to expand, stretching endlessly into shadowy corridors that shouldn't exist. Figures emerged from the darkness, faceless, pale, sliding along the floor with impossible speed. The whispers followed them, inside their heads now, repeating over and over. "Join us, stay with us, forever." Aisha screamed. Dr. Kazim slammed the door behind them, but it wouldn't lock. Something pressed from the other side, soft, wet, insistent. The lights went out completely. The whispers turned to screams, 1,000 voices screaming in unison. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The lights flickered back. The morgue was empty. No body, no shadows, no whispers. Just the cold, antiseptic smell and the faint hum of refrigerating units. Shaken, they checked the morgue cameras. There was no record of them entering, no video, no movement. Every corpse that had been on the slabs that night was accounted for, except the one. The unidentified male was gone, leaving no trace. Dr. Kazim filed a report, marking the event as an unexplained disturbance, but privately, he knew the truth. Something was in that morgue, something that shouldn't exist, and it spoke to them. Aisha never returned to night shifts, but months later she received a package with no return address, a photograph of the morgue taken at night. In the center of the photo, on the farthest slab, lay the body, but its eyes were open, staring directly at her. She burned the photo immediately, but sometimes, when the wind howled outside her apartment, she would hear whispers, soft and chilling. "We are waiting, waiting for you."
It was nearly midnight in the ICU. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the rows of beds where machines beeped in monotonous rhythm. Only a handful of nurses remained. Most had left hours ago, leaving a skeleton night shift. Nurse Fatima was making her rounds, checking IV lines, adjusting monitors. She had seen death many times before, but tonight something felt off. The patients seemed restless. Their eyes fluttered under closed lids, murmuring faintly. Machines that had been stable began to spike and dip without explanation. Her first check was on Mr. Ade, a middle-aged man recovering from surgery. Everything seemed normal until she noticed a figure standing at the foot of his bed. "Hello?" she called softly. The figure didn't move. In fact, it didn't seem real. Its edges shimmered like heat waves in the summer. Fatima froze. Slowly, she approached. The figure was tall, cloaked in shadow, face obscured. She reached out, and it vanished. Shaken, she chalked it up to exhaustion. ICU nights were long, and fatigue could play tricks on the mind. But when she returned to Mr. Ade's bed, the monitors had gone haywire, oxygen levels plummeting, heart rate erratic. "Mr. Ade, can you hear me?" she whispered. His eyes opened, not fully, just a slit, but they were wrong. The pupils were dilated, reflecting the light unnaturally. And then he whispered, a voice not entirely his own. "They're here. Don't let them take me." Before she could react, the doors to the ICU swung open, even though they had been locked. A cold wind rushed through the room, carrying the scent of antiseptic mixed with decay. Shadows poured in, stretching along the walls, reaching toward the beds like dark fingers. Fatima's heart raced. She wanted to call for help, but her phone was dead. Every electronic device in the ICU flickered, screens flashing static. The monitors went silent. The steady beeping of life support machines was gone. Only silence and the soft, chilling whispers that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Join us, join us, join us." Then she saw him. A figure moved slowly between the beds, a man, impossibly thin, face pale and hollow, eyes black pits. He lingered near Mr. Ade, whispering something incomprehensible. Fatima tried to grab him, but her hands passed through air. He turned toward her, tilting his head unnaturally, as if the neck were broken and reassembled backwards. She screamed. Suddenly, the bedsheets of every patient began to rise, floating like specters. Machines erupted with alarms, spitting warnings of code blue, yet every patient appeared still. The black-eyed figure reached out a hand toward Mr. Ade. "No!" Fatima shouted, lunging forward. The figure vanished. The ICU fell silent again. The monitors stabilized, patients' vitals returning to normal. Only Mr. Ade was missing. The bed was empty, the sheets perfectly tucked, as if he had never been there. Fatima ran to the nurse's station, but the footage showed nothing. The ICU had been empty that night, except for her. Every attempt to find Mr. Ade failed. Official records indicated he'd never been admitted. Over the next few nights, the ICU became a place of fear. Staff reported seeing figures at the foot of beds, patients whispering in voices that weren't theirs, and monitors fluctuating with no apparent reason. Every few weeks, a patient would vanish without record, leaving behind a bed neatly made, as if nothing had happened. Fatima couldn't sleep. She began hearing whispers outside the hospital, in the streets, in her apartment, in the echo of empty hallways. "We are coming. You will join us." Eventually, she resigned, unable to bear the nightly terror. But the ICU had left a mark on her mind. She could no longer pass a hospital without looking at the entrances, imagining black figures waiting in the shadows. Months later, a friend who worked in hospital administration called her, voice trembling. "Fatima, it's happening again. Another ICU patient vanished last night. The monitors went haywire. It's the ICU." Fatima didn't respond. She already knew. The ICU never let go of those who saw it. It waited in the shadows, always hungry for more. And somewhere, in a room she would never enter again, a bed remained empty, waiting for the next visitor. The operating room at St. Michael's Hospital was supposed to be the safest place in the building. Sterile, bright, precise. Machines beeped rhythmically. Surgeons and nurses moved in choreography perfected by years of training. But on this particular night, the operating room felt wrong. Dr. Omari, a senior surgeon, was preparing for an emergency appendectomy. The patient, a young man named Chinedu, had been rushed in from a nearby accident. There was nothing unusual about the case, except for the nurse's comment. "Doctor, the anesthesia monitor flickered strangely while prepping. It almost seemed like it reacted to him." Dr. Omari dismissed it. Machines sometimes acted up. The operation started routinely. Chinedu's vitals were stable. Everything was textbook. Then the whispers began. At first, Dr. Omari thought it was the hum of machines or fatigue creeping into his mind. But soon, the whispers became distinct, coming from every corner of the room. Don't cut. Don't let them in." The surgical team froze. No one else seemed to hear it. Dr. Omari leaned closer to the patient's ear. Chinedu's eyes were open, darting frantically beneath the anesthesia mask. He tried to speak, but could only make a faint rasp. Seconds later, the lights flickered. Shadows danced across the ceiling and walls, forming shapes too grotesque to comprehend. The heart monitor jumped erratically. A beep, a flat line. A beep, a flat line. Dr. Omari tried to proceed. Scalpel in hand, he made the first incision, but the moment his knife touched skin, it felt like the patient's body stiffened unnaturally. The flesh under his hand seemed wrong, almost resisting. The whispers grew louder, now forming sentences. "Leave or become like us forever." Nurses began panicking, dropping instruments. One of them sure she saw a figure in the reflection of the surgical light, a tall, dark figure standing beside the patient's table, watching silently. When she turned, there was nothing there. Dr. Omari's vision blurred. He felt as though invisible hands were pressing against his chest, slowing his heartbeat. The air became cold, icy, biting. Condensation formed on the surgical lamps, dripping onto the sterile floor. Suddenly, the patient gasped. Chinedu's eyes were no longer human, black, vast, reflecting the flickering lights of the OR. He tried to sit up, though he was fully sedated. His body convulsed violently. Machines went haywire, alarms screeched, lights exploded into blinding flashes. The surgical team ran. Dr. Omari, alone now, could feel the room closing in. The walls seemed to bend, stretch, the ceiling lowering. Shadows stretched from the corners of the room, reaching for him. Then he saw it, the figure, unmistakable, tall and cloaked in black, standing at the head of the operating table. Its face was featureless, smooth, but he felt its gaze pierce into him. The whispers became a roar echoing inside his skull. "You belong. You belong." Dr. Omari stumbled backward, nearly tripping over surgical tools. He tried to reach the door, but it slammed shut, locking automatically, though no one had touched it. The lights went out completely. Only the monitors glowed, flickering, showing Chinedu's vitals. Flat line. A shadow lunged at him. He could feel it pass through his body, freezing him, suffocating him. He heard a low, guttural voice, "Stay forever." Just as he felt himself slipping into unconsciousness, the lights flickered back. The room was empty. Chinedu's bed was vacant. Instruments lay scattered, but the surgical team had disappeared. Panicked, Dr. Omari checked the hospital records. No patient named Chinedu had been admitted. The emergency call logs showed no accident victims for that night, as if the entire event had never occurred.
He tried to warn the night staff, but none of them recalled the chaos. No alarms had sounded. No one remembered leaving the OR. Weeks later, Dr. Omari received an anonymous package. Inside was a surgical mask stained with dark, almost black blood. On the inside of the mask, scratched carefully, were the words, "We are always watching. The next OR is ready." From that night onward, Dr. Omari avoided surgery entirely. He couldn't bear to be in the OR, even during the day. And sometimes, when the hospital is quiet and the machines hum, he swears he can hear whispers echoing from empty ORs. "Join us, join us, join us."
The children's ward was supposed to be the safest place in the hospital. Bright walls, pastel murals of animals dancing in fields, small beds lined neatly with stuffed animals and blankets, balloons taped to IV stands. During the day, the ward hummed with life, parents sitting beside their children, nurses moving gently, voices low and comforting. But at night, the ward became something else entirely. Nurse Miriam Okoro had worked pediatric night shifts at Graceview Hospital for nearly a decade. She knew the sounds, the rhythms, the steady beeping of monitors, the quiet coughing, the soft crying that came and went like gentle waves. She could tell when a child's fever was breaking, when pain was subsiding, when something was wrong before the machines could register it. But this night felt off. By 1:47 a.m., most of the children were asleep. The hallway lights had been dimmed, leaving only the soft bluish glow above each bed. Miriam walked slowly, clipboard in hand, checking vitals and making sure the IVs were functioning properly. The ward was silent. Too silent. It started with the lights. A flicker. Not a full blackout, just a quick, imperceptible blink. Once. Twice. Miriam paused mid-step. The children didn't stir. The monitors kept their steady rhythm. She told herself it was old wiring. This hospital had been standing for decades. The electrical system was temperamental at times. But then she heard it. Footsteps. Small ones, bare feet slapping softly against the tile floor. Her pulse quickened. She scanned the hallway, heart pounding. At the far end, near the emergency exit, a child stood alone. A little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, thin in a pale hospital gown, bare feet, toes pressed against the cold floor. "Hey," Miriam whispered sharply, "you're not supposed to be out of bed." The boy didn't move. He didn't even blink. He stood perfectly still, his head tilted slightly down, hair shadowing his face. Miriam's stomach churned. She knew every child in the ward, their names, their conditions, which parent slept overnight and which didn't. This boy was not on her list. "Which room are you from?" she asked, forcing calm into her voice. The boy slowly lifted his head. His eyes were wrong, wide, unblinking, reflecting the dim nightlight like glass. And then he smiled. It wasn't a child's smile. It was stretched, distorted, wrong, something unnatural in its precision, as if he had copied a human expression but didn't quite understand it. "Lights go off at 2, he said softly. Miriam felt the blood drain from her face. That's not funny," she stammered, though her voice betrayed a quiver. "Where are your parents?" The boy tilted his head. "They didn't wake up." A cold draft ran down Miriam's spine. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the irrational fear building inside her.
She reached toward the boy's shoulder, but her hand passed through him. Not like a ghost, not cinematic or dramatic, just nothing. The boy stepped back, almost gliding on the floor. "Don't touch," he whispered. "They don't like that." Miriam's heart raced. "Who?" The hallway lights flickered violently this time. The monitors on nearby beds all beeped erratically. One child stirred in her sleep, murmuring incoherently. Miriam and Esther ran down the hall. They saw nothing, nothing alive, nothing moving, yet the feeling of being watched pressed down on them, cold and relentless. The little boy reappeared at the far end of the hallway, his eyes still wide and black. He didn't walk, he glided silently toward them. Miriam froze. Her instinct screamed to run. Esther grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back, but the boy stopped a few feet away, tilting his head, smiling. "He said he'll come back tomorrow," a soft voice whispered from one of the beds. A little girl, her hands clutching her blanket, pointed down the hallway. "The boy who turns off the lights." Miriam's mouth dried. She tried to speak, but no words came out. The hallway lights flickered back on. The alarm stopped. The children's vitals returned to normal. The little boy was gone. Hospital records later confirmed something impossible. The children's ward lights had been manually turned off from inside the building at exactly 2 a.m. No fingerprints, no tampering. Security footage revealed nothing. There was no child admitted that night matching his description. Yet the older nurses remembered something. Years ago, before the hospital was renovated, a fire had broken out in the children's ward during a late-night power outage. Several children had died in their sleep. Official reports said they never woke up. Miriam never returned to the children's ward. She transferred to another department, leaving behind the memories, the lights, and the boy. But she still remembers the small details, the soft slap of bare feet on tile, the unblinking eyes, the way the air turned icy without warning. Sometimes when the wind howls outside the hospital windows, she swears she can see shadows moving down the long, empty hallways. And when the lights flicker, she knows he is waiting for 2 a.m. and tomorrow.